Hey all, so I wanted to talk a little bit about exporting out to Alembic caches. I want to be talking about this in context to a specific project that we're working on in my class, but at the same time I also want you all to be able to use this in other classes, so I'm going to try to include a little bit of like general information in here. So I have a skeletal mesh and animation that was exported out of Maya, and it's from this scene. And so when we exported this out, we used a selection set for Tim's animation. I'll let you see it here. We get this sort of character animation. This is obviously all in a rigged character. And so you'll see that he has an export set that we exported out, which includes all of the joints that are driving this animation and all of the meshes that are being driven, right? And so this is what's being exported out, the skeleton that is driving it. And so when we export out normally for a game engine, we would go to game exporter and like make sure that export set is selected, and it will export out just those things. It will bake the keyframes onto the skeleton. The skeleton is moving the mesh, and we would import that into Unreal as a skeletal mesh. So that's what we have here is that skeletal mesh, and you'll see when it comes in, we get the model, we get this skeleton hierarchy of all the joints that are driving everything, right? But we also get animation clips that we can export out and apply to that skeleton. So the animation in this file is just a sorry, it's calculating some shaders, I think. The animation that is in this shot is right here. If I click on the animation clip, you'll see this is just keyframe data that is on that skeleton, right? It's got a weird like, motion blur thing happening on here, but don't worry about that. Now, if I were to drag the skeleton itself in here, the skeletal mesh itself in here, and zero that out, you'll see its location very quickly here, right? That is the origin point that the character was rigged in Maya. That is the origin point it comes in Unreal, right? Now, if I were to drag the animation clip in here and zero it out, you'll see that it's in a different spot, right? And the reason it's in a different spot is because this mesh that's being driven by all these skeletal joints, right? Those skeletal joints have moved, and now it is no longer at its origin point, right? But you'll also notice that my model of Tim here, its pivot point is here, and then this character of Tim, its pivot point is here, right? So really what's happened is this is where the model is, and we've used these joints that are driving it to move it to somewhere else. So that's just a background to understand how most animation goes into a video game. And what the benefit of that is that you can have the skeleton being deformed by those joints, but since those joints just have like rotation data on them, you can blend them, right? You can blend between the rotation data of one arm animation and another arm animation to get sort of a interactive range of stuff. So, however, sometimes some characters, some situations call for things that are needed in Unreal that are rigged differently than just with a skeleton, right? So Unreal can understand morph targets and blend shapes, but what it doesn't understand is other types of deformers, right? So, and the other issues with this is sometimes things are just complicated in the way they're set up in Maya, and it's hard to get it to implement into Unreal. So what that means is we would export these types of things in a different way. And so an example of what I need in the scene is actually my cape. So my cape has a couple of things going on. One, it is in Maya, it is attached to the character's chest. So it's part of the rigging, which means if I exported this out as a skeletal mesh, I have to try to reattach it to the chest of the character in Unreal again, and that can require sockets or whatever, right? So what I am going to do instead is, I'm stuck in my camera here. My character is, or this cape is scanned here. Did I smooth this? Small, poly smooth face. I did. So I've smoothed this to make it a little bit nicer. So I just went to mesh and smooth to like try to make it a little smoother. Now this is completely being driven by a rig, but this could also be a simulation of a cape or anything like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this out as an Alembic cache. So this is located in a different thing, or a different area. And so the range I have is still the same range. So you'll notice a couple of things. I have all of this deformation on it, but I also have transparency on it. It's invisible up until frame 100, right? And then it becomes visible. There's other situations I might need, like if I needed this cape to rip, right? Or if I needed like something to break, right? That an Alembic cache would maybe work just a little bit better for. So I am going to export that out by going to Cache, Alembic Cache, Export Selection to Alembic. And I'm going to choose this options box. Right? And so I have it selected here, right? And that's why I export selected to Alembic. And it should pop up with the right cache time here, frame 1 to 122. That's correct. If it doesn't, you can always manually put it in there. Really, the only thing we're going to need to change is if when you first open this up, none of these things are probably visible, right? And what I usually do is I select, or none of these are checked. I usually select from UV right all the way down to right visibility. If you need to, you can also write UV sets, but in this case, I don't have any additional UV sets. I also don't really worry about stripping namespaces, but it possibly if you needed that. So I'm just going to export this selection. I'll put this just on my desktop here. Well, yeah, that's fine. And I'm going to give it a name, and I'll call this Cape Alembic, which is not the namespace you would want to use for the project we're currently working on. The current working project, you'll see I already have this exported out. We would want to use a namespace like this, which is... Wait, I'm sorry, that's not the right location. Shot 430. Here we go. Exports. So if you're working on this project, what we're looking for is cape _ shot 430 _ Alembic. And so that's just to let him know that, let the person who's assembling the scene know that this is an Alembic cache that needs to be implemented in. So with that in, I'll go ahead and export selected. And you'll see that it's going to kind of bake it. Now, what's happening differently here is this is not exporting out a skeleton. This is looking at the location of the vertices for every frame of the animation, and it is saving that vertex data, right? It's saving the vertices where they're at for every frame, right? So essentially what it's doing is like, go in here and select one, it's taking that vertex and it's sampling it for every frame and setting a keyframe on it, essentially, right? And so what we export out is like essentially a point cloud data of all of the locations of these vertices, right? Now it's bigger, it's a little heavier. You'll notice that just for the cape that we were getting in that export here, the cape is almost the size of the entire animation for the character. So I mean, it's a little heavy, and that's one of the reasons it's not often used. It's also not something that can be easily blended inside of Unreal. But once I get it into Unreal, we can go ahead and sort of see how this works. So just to make this easier, I'm going to go ahead and make a quick level sequence. Add level sequence. Sure, that looks good. So in Sequencer, I can now, let me go ahead and delete this guy here. I can drag in Tim, the character, right? And so we add the animation. The only animation I have in here is 430. And if I were to hit play in Sequencer, you'll see it'll play our sequence, right? I can sort of tumble my camera around here. Let me go ahead and add a camera so we can sort of see how he looks. Sorry, I'm trying to get my focus settings. Point those in on Tim so he's in focus, right? So now we have this animation. I'll try to frame this a little bit better so we can see it. This isn't the camera directly from Maya, but So this should look a little bit better. And now when we hit play on this, we got the animation that's the skeletal mesh. So I want to add the cape to that. And so I'll minimize all this stuff back out. You can see. So to import in an Alembic cache, I went ahead and made a folder here for an Alembic. Just right click, import to game mesh. I'll go ahead and get on my desktop and grab that. It is, this is where I exported it, right? Cape Alembic, there it is. Open. And so you'll recognize that by default, it knows that this is a model, right? And it wants to go to a static mesh. So a static mesh is like a rock, a chair, like something that doesn't move, right? What we're wanting is a geometry cache. And so it's cached data of vertex movement. So geometry cache, and I'll just go ahead and hit import. So the only real way to be able to see this is to kind of see it in the sequencer. If we just drag it into the scene, it doesn't work as well. Just to make this, give us a little bit more screen real estate, I'll do it this way. But I can drag the cape out here into the scene. We don't really see anything yet, and we'll talk about why that is in just a second. But the reason, so now that my cape Alembic is there, I can now drag that into my scene. Right? And you'll notice if I scrub, it's still not showing up. And that's because I have it in here, but an Alembic is like, this is the fact that it exists. We have to add the animation track to that Alembic, right? And so there's a couple, I get confused about which it is that works for this, but I believe we go to geometry cache component, and then we can go to geometry cache. Right? And so now we have this Alembic cache. I'll go ahead and get it lined up there. And I know what you're saying is like, Greg, it's still not there. Well, remember, it doesn't actually become visible until here, right? And so now that animation cache is visible all the way up to there. And we have, sorry, I'm trying to extend my frame here. We now have the cape working. The biggest problem with Alembic cache, so really this is the thing to recognize, that what I've done here and why it matches up perfectly, is that this is actually not, there's no joints driving this, right? What this is, you'll see that there is my object, and this is just a bunch of vertices, and Unreal knows that these vertices are so many units away from its origin point. So as long as your origin is zeroed and your character is zeroed, they will all line up, right? In fact, I could export the entire character if I was just doing this for rendering. I could export the entire character as an Alembic for rendering purposes, right? So I can go back into my cinematic camera actor here and watch it, and so we should see now the animation. Apparently I need to trim that off by a frame. Let's end it like there. And let's let that play in a loop a few times. So you'll see that's where the animation triggers. And so that means it exported out the visibility information on here as well. Now it also exported out, if I select this, a material, but it didn't really bring anything in with it, right? So I would want to be able to edit this material, and that's sort of one of the issues, is like, how do you get to that easily? And if you double click it, like there are ways of doing it, but recognize that if you already had an FBX of this cape, or just exported out a static mesh of this cape, and the material came in with it, you could actually just switch to that material, right? Or if you really wanted to, you could just make a new material. What am I looking for? I don't do this a lot. A new material, right? And we'll call this, well, let's get my base color here. No, I don't know. Anyway, we can make this new material here. Black will work. That I could add a texture to, and then let me rename it. And so now I can go over here and find Cape Matte and apply it to it, right? Which I don't have anything on there, but I do have other materials that exist, and so I can just do that to show you. So if your object has multiple materials, the hard part is getting to the materials. The easiest way is just to actually make the material and assign it, or import in a static mesh that will bring in the materials with it, so you can apply them after the fact. So I'll show you with a material that actually works, but it's still calculating stuff. There we go. Let's do like this basic floor material so we can kind of see it. There we go. And so now, if we go back to sequencer and watch it, you'll be able to see like so. With all that said, this can be used for a lot of different things. And so the reason I show you this is because if I were to go back to Maya here, new scene, I'm not going to save it, and I wanted to, let's say, go to polygon model and make this a little bit bigger here where we can see it. Make the higher resolution, right? Let's make it like more like 100, right? If I were doing something like a here, I'll do a couple just so we can see the differences of them. Different deformers, right? I may want to do rigging, deform, non-linear. Let's do a squash and stretch on here, right? And I'll just set a couple of keyframes on here. Shorten this. That's way too long. We'll just set a key on factor and then just kind of animate this out, right? Generally, Unreal would not be able to understand what this even is, right? Like it doesn't have a non-linear squash and stretch that is just a one-to-one alteration of that in Unreal, right? And so that means that this animation, although it may look great in here, right, doesn't work as well in Unreal. Another one that might not work is a lot of these other deformers. Pretty much anything except for a joint will cause you some issues. So if you wanted to do a cluster, right? So the way clusters work, let's say if I grab a bunch of vertices, I can go to deform cluster, right? And so now I have this little cluster handle that deforms all of those vertices, right? But I can also paint the weights of those vertices, so I'll move that cluster up, deform, and paint weights on the cluster, right? Where my paint weight tool is, I'll bring it back up here, right? And so I could just flood smooth this a lot, right? Get that much squishier feel of stuff. Right. Or let's actually try something different instead. Let's flood replace that where nothing is being affected, and then I will just paint add where it is being affected. Right. I don't want to paint that till it goes all the way up to 1. Wait, I think I'm doing that wrong. I think I have to replace it, not add. It's letting me add too much. There we go. Get that all the way up to 1 there. And then I can smooth it a little bit more to make that feel soft. There we go, right? And so now I have this cluster, and I can do stuff like, if I needed it to feel like something bumps and like dents my object, right? Like something hits it and pushes it down and then it comes back up, I can make an animation with that. So I'll just do like a quick dent in that. Whoa. And then go out a little bit later and then bring that back out and then set it back to 0. So we got that kind of animation as well. And again, all I'm really doing is animating the vertices on these, right? So if I were to grab these two now and do an Alembic cache, export selection to Alembic cache, I will call these spheres. Export selection. Right. Those came in again as Alembic caches. I can go back into Unreal and go back to my content browser. I'll just go ahead and import them into here. Import to game Alembic. Let's go here to spheres, ABC, open. Again, geometry cache, that's good. Import. And you notice it's like kind of slow. If I were to actually go look at that file really quick on my desktop, you'll see that just those two spheres exporting out, well, I got a lot of junk on my desktop. It's almost 10 megabytes, right? So there they are. I can drag them into the scene. Oh, those are bigger than I thought. Maybe we'll scale them down so we can still see it here. Scale it down to something like that. I'm going to go ahead and zero this out just so we have them. Right. Actually, I may not zero it out. I may move them up to here and just rotate them around so you can see them a little bit better in the scene, right? And so those have the caches on them, but you'll see it's not really playing here. But in my sequencer, if I were to drag those in, and you may actually be able to get away with just doing this and geometry cache. Let's see if that does it. It does. Just put it out here on the end. You'll see that now what we actually have is those actually are doing the things that we want them to do, right? And so this is a really nice way to be able to get additional things into your scene if they're not game friendly, right? If they're not game ready. And so we can go back to our camera there. Oh, I can't. I was already in my camera, and hit back and play. Let's try that again. Right. So we have like full control over what we actually are able to animate there. So hopefully that's helpful. I guess the thing that I will add to this for people who are wanting to use this as a render engine is that now that we have these in here, all we really have to do now is add an environment. If you wanted to use this to render like one of your shots, we can go to my library where I've already downloaded dozens of environments, right? And I could just add like this winter road scene, right? Or this backyard pack, right? Anything that I've already gotten. If you don't already have the free stuff, there's free stuff all the time on Fab. Every month Unreal gives away something for free. And then there's a bunch of stuff that's just sort of perma-free. There's even stuff on like Humble Bundles and stuff that you could buy and just add to the project. And then you open that level and create your sequencer within that level, and you'd be able to make your own environment or use an Unreal environment as the backdrop for your animations. So hopefully this is helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye.